Thomas was used to the quiet of his remote farmhouse, a silence that had settled in ever since his wife passed. It began with strange noises in the kitchen, soft scratching, heavy breathing, shadows darting just out of sight. When his daughter spotted something moving behind him during a video call, Thomas knew this wasn't mice. Most people would have panicked, but Thomas didn't back away. Despite his children urging him to call for help, he grabbed his flashlight to investigate. When Thomas checked under the kitchen counter, he finally came face to face with the intruder that had taken up residence in his home. It was a wild bobcat, and she was in the middle of giving birth. This desperate mother had chosen his kitchen as her sanctuary. And just when it seemed the story had reached its most unforgettable moment, something even more unbelievable happened. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Thomas Hargrove had grown accustomed to silence. At 73, he'd been living alone in his weathered farmhouse on the outskirts of Flagstaff, Arizona for nearly 5 years now. Ever since Margaret passed. The house, once filled with the chaos of 3 children and countless family gatherings, now echoed with every footstep on its century-old pine floors. His children, Sarah in Phoenix, Michael in Denver, and youngest daughter Emily in Portland, called regularly, but their voices through the phone couldn't fill the spaces where laughter once lived. The property sprawled across 12 acres of high desert and ponderosa pine forest, backing up against the Coconino National Forest. It was the kind of land that still remembered what Arizona looked like before the cities grew, where elk occasionally wandered through the back meadow and coyotes sang their nightly chorus. Thomas had always loved this wildness, but lately, it felt more like isolation than freedom. The strange noises started in early May, just as the last of the spring snow melted from the north-facing slopes. At first, Thomas dismissed them as the house settling. Lord knew a structure built in 1923 had earned the right to complain. But these sounds were different from the familiar groans and sighs of old timber. There was scratching, soft and persistent, coming from somewhere near the kitchen after dark. Then came the thuds, like something dropping onto the floor from a height. "Probably pack rats," he muttered to himself one evening, setting down his crossword puzzle. Pack rats were common enough in these parts, notorious for getting into attics and wall spaces. He'd dealt with them before. But when he set out traps baited with peanut butter, they remained untouched night after night. The sounds grew bolder. One night, while heating leftover soup, Thomas heard what sounded like breathing, heavy, rhythmic breathing, coming from beneath the kitchen counter. He froze, ladle suspended over the pot, straining to listen. The breathing stopped. When he moved, he heard a quick shuffling, then silence. "Dad, you really should get someone to check it out," Sarah insisted during their weekly video call. She was sitting in her bright Phoenix kitchen, concern etched across her face. "What if it's something dangerous? You're out there all alone." "I've lived here 40 years, sweetheart. I think I can handle a few mice," Thomas replied, though truth be told, he was beginning to wonder what exactly had taken up residence in his home. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was a Thursday. He remembered because he'd just finished watching the evening news when Emily called for their regular chat. She was telling him about her new job at the veterinary clinic when her eyes suddenly went wide. "Dad!" "Oh my God, Dad, behind you. Something just moved behind you." Thomas spun around, catching only a glimpse of movement disappearing around the corner toward the kitchen. It was larger than any rat, moving with a fluid grace that made his heart skip. "Did you see that?" Emily's voice pitched higher. "Dad, that was not a mouse. That That was big. After hanging up with a promise to investigate and call her back, Thomas sat in his recliner for a long moment, gathering courage. He'd faced down aggressive bulls on his father's ranch as a boy, helped Margaret through 3 difficult births, and buried too many loved ones to count. But something about this unknown presence in his home unsettled him deeply. Armed with his heavy-duty flashlight, the kind that could double as a weapon if needed, Thomas began his search. He moved through each room methodically, checking closets, peering under beds, examining every corner where something might hide. The living room yielded nothing. The spare bedrooms were empty save for dust motes dancing in the flashlight beam. The bathroom was clear. That left the kitchen. Thomas stood in the doorway, flashlight raised, scanning the familiar space. Everything appeared normal. Dishes drying in the rack, coffee maker ready for tomorrow morning. Margaret's collection of ceramic roosters still lined up on the windowsill. He checked behind the refrigerator, finding only dust bunnies. The pantry revealed nothing unusual. Then he remembered the breathing he'd heard beneath the counter. Slowly, joints protesting, Thomas lowered himself to one knee. The space under the counter where Margaret used to store her large soup pots was dark, deeper than it appeared from above. He aimed the flashlight into the shadows. The beam illuminated a sight that would be burned into his memory forever. A female bobcat lay on her side, her tawny coat damp with sweat, her flanks heaving with exertion. She'd somehow gathered old dish towels, newspaper, and what looked like insulation from the walls to create a crude nest. Her golden eyes, pupils dilated from pain and effort, locked onto the light. But she didn't flee. She couldn't. Beside her, still wet and barely moving, lay 2 tiny forms. Newborn kittens, their eyes sealed shut, mewling weakly. As Thomas watched, frozen in absolute shock, another contraction rippled through the bobcat's body. Her lips pulled back, revealing impressive canines, and a low growl escaped her throat. Not of aggression, but of pure primal effort. As someone who'd spent decades in rural Arizona, Thomas knew bobcats. He'd seen them hunting rabbits in the early morning, had once found tracks around his chicken coop, had even had a memorable stare down with one while hiking. But this, a bobcat choosing his kitchen as a birthing den, this was beyond anything he'd ever heard of. This bobcat must have been in serious distress to seek shelter here. Perhaps she'd been displaced from her territory by development. Or maybe she was a young mother, inexperienced in choosing den sites. The fact that she'd gathered nesting materials suggested she'd been here for days, maybe weeks, preparing. Thomas's mind raced through his options. He should call Arizona Game and Fish immediately. A wild bobcat in the house, especially one giving birth, was dangerous. She could attack if she felt her kittens were threatened. She could carry rabies, though she showed no signs of it. Every rational thought told him to back away and make the call. But something in those golden eyes stopped him. She was terrified, he realized. Despite being a predator capable of taking down prey twice her size, despite those claws that could shred flesh like paper, she was utterly vulnerable in this moment. Another contraction gripped her, and she panted heavily, her pink tongue visible. "Easy, Mama," Thomas heard himself whisper, his voice barely audible. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." Whether she understood his intent or was simply too exhausted to react, the bobcat's growl softened. Thomas carefully, slowly, reached for an old flannel blanket draped over a kitchen chair, one Margaret had made years ago. Moving with deliberate slowness, he pushed it toward the nest with a broom handle adding to her makeshift den. For the next 2 hours, Thomas maintained his vigil. He sat on the kitchen floor, back against the refrigerator, flashlight pointed at the ceiling to provide indirect light. He watched as the Bobcat delivered 2 more kittens, each arrival announced by her guttural groans and followed by the delicate ritual of cleaning. She was meticulous, her rough tongue working over each tiny body until it squirmed and cried. The sound surprisingly similar to domestic kittens, but with a wilder edge. Bobcat mothers are incredibly devoted, often going without food for days while nursing. In the wild, they typically have 2 to 4 kittens, born after a gestation period of about 60 days. The kittens are born blind and helpless, weighing less than a pound each. This mother was textbook in her behavior, immediately bonding with each kitten, stimulating them to breathe, guiding them to nurse. By the time the 5th and final kitten arrived, smaller than the others, its cry weaker, the first hints of dawn were creeping through the kitchen window. The mother Bobcat was exhausted, her breathing finally steadying as she curled around her litter. The kittens, no bigger than Thomas's fist, kneaded against her belly, searching for milk. Thomas sat there, an unlikely witness to one of nature's most intimate moments, and found tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. When was the last time he'd cried? Margaret's funeral? The silence of his house, which had felt so oppressive these past years, was now filled with the soft, suckling sounds of nursing kittens and the rhythmic purr of their mother. Yes, bobcats do purr, though it's more of a rumble than a domestic cat's purr. When the sun fully rose, Thomas finally stood, his joints screaming in protest after hours on the hard floor. He needed to make some decisions. The rational part of his brain knew he should call the authorities immediately. But looking at the exhausted mother and her helpless kittens, he couldn't do it. Not yet. Instead, he called Sarah. "Dad, you're joking," she said when he explained the situation. "A bobcat? In your kitchen? With babies?" "5 of them," Thomas confirmed, sending her a photo he'd taken with his phone. The photo sparked a family conference call within the hour. Michael, ever practical, insisted their father call Game and Fish immediately. "Dad, this is dangerous. What if she attacks you?" Emily, with her veterinary training, was torn between fascination and concern. "They need to be monitored, Dad. The mother might abandon them if she feels threatened, or worse, she might become aggressive protecting them." But it was Sarah who asked the question that mattered. "What do you want to do, Dad?" Thomas looked through the kitchen doorway where he could just see the edge of the makeshift den. "I want to give her a chance. Just a few days. Let her recover. Let the kittens get stronger." Against their better judgment, his children agreed to a compromise. Thomas would give the Bobcat family 1 week, maintaining strict boundaries. No approaching the den, no attempts to touch or tame them. He'd leave food and water at a safe distance. If there were any signs of aggression or illness, he'd call the authorities immediately. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary week of Thomas's recent life. He established a routine that respected both his need for the kitchen and the Bobcat's need for security. Early mornings, before the mother stirred, he'd quietly place a plate of raw chicken or rabbit meat, procured from a confused but accommodating butcher in town, near the den entrance. He'd fill a water bowl, then retreat to the living room, giving her space. From a distance, he watched the kittens develop with remarkable speed. Within 3 days, they were crawling more confidently. By day 5, their eyes began to crack open, revealing blue-gray irises that would eventually turn golden like their mothers. The mother Bobcat, whom Thomas had begun calling Sage for her wise, patient demeanor, proved to be exceptionally devoted. She rarely left the den except to eat and eliminate, always returning quickly to her mewling babies. Thomas documented everything with his phone, sending daily updates to his children. The photos and videos went from concerned proof of life to something resembling a nature documentary. His grandchildren were enthralled, begging for updates about Grandpa's wildcats. But Thomas noticed other things too, things that spoke to Sage's intelligence and adaptability. She learned his routine, tensing when he entered the kitchen, but no longer growling if he moved slowly and kept his distance. Once, when one kitten crawled too far from the den while she was eating, she looked directly at Thomas, a clear communication of trust that he wouldn't harm her baby while she retrieved it. This kind of mutual understanding between wild animals and humans is rare but not impossible. Animals are far more perceptive than we often credit them for. Sage had likely been observing Thomas for weeks before giving birth, determining he wasn't a threat. Her choice to stay even after being discovered suggested a level of desperation, but also perhaps an instinctual recognition of his benign intent. By the second week, the situation grew more complex. The kittens were becoming mobile, their play increasingly boisterous. Thomas would hear them at night, tumbling and wrestling, their little growls and squeaks echoing through the house. They'd begun exploring beyond the kitchen, leaving tiny paw prints in the dust of unused rooms. One evening, Thomas found the smallest kitten, the runt he'd worried about, had somehow climbed onto the living room sofa and fallen asleep on Margaret's favorite cushion. It was then that the real world intruded on their unlikely arrangement. Bill Morrison, Thomas's nearest neighbor a quarter-mile down the road, called with concern in his voice. "Tom, I don't want to worry you, but I saw something strange last night. Looked like a big cat near my chicken coop. You haven't seen anything unusual, have you?" Thomas's heart sank. He knew Sage had been leaving the house to hunt. She had to feed herself to produce milk for her kittens. But if she was ranging as far as Bill's property, it was only a matter of time before someone spotted her and called the authorities. Or worse, someone might shoot her, thinking she was a threat to livestock. That evening, Thomas sat in his recliner, watching Sage move her kittens one by one to a new spot, behind the washing machine in the adjoining laundry room. She was getting ready to leave, he realized. In the wild, bobcat mothers frequently moved their dens to avoid predators and parasites. Her instincts were telling her it was time. "You know you have to go, don't you?" he said softly as she passed, a kitten dangling from her mouth. She paused, those golden eyes meeting his for a long moment, then continued with her task. The next morning, Thomas made a decision. He opened every door in the house, front, back, even the garage. He placed a trail of meat leading from the laundry room to the back door and beyond, toward the forest edge. Then he retreated to his bedroom and waited. He dozed off in his chair, waking to the sound of his phone buzzing. Emily was calling. "Dad, did you see them leave?" Thomas hurried to the window. There, at the edge of the tree line, illuminated by the setting sun, was Sage. 4 kittens tumbled around her feet, pouncing on grass stalks and each other. They were leaving, returning to the wild where they belonged. But as Thomas watched, his heart sank. 4 kittens. There should have been 5. He found the 5th one, the runt, crying pitifully in the laundry room. Whether it had been sleeping when Sage moved the others or was simply too weak to keep up, Thomas didn't know. But it was alone, abandoned, and based on its increasingly desperate cries, hungry. This is one of the hardest realities of wildlife rehabilitation. Nature isn't sentimental. Mothers will sometimes abandon the weakest offspring if it threatens the survival of the others. Sage had made a calculated decision. 4 healthy kittens had better chances than 5 with one struggling to keep up. Thomas spent the night trying to coax the kitten to the door, hoping Sage would return for it. He placed it in a box near the forest edge, its cries echoing in the darkness. But Sage didn't come back. By morning, the kitten was weak, barely crying anymore. With a heavy heart, Thomas finally made the call he should have made weeks ago. The Arizona Game and Fish officers who arrived were surprisingly understanding. Officer Janet Rodriguez, a veteran wildlife biologist with 20 years of experience, listened to Thomas's story with a mix of professional concern and barely concealed fascination. "Mr. Hargrove, what you've witnessed is extraordinary," she said, gently examining the weak kitten. "Bobcats are incredibly secretive. To have one give birth in a human dwelling, then successfully raise kittens there, I've never heard of anything like it." Her partner, a younger officer named David Park, was already setting up equipment. "The kitten's dehydrated but not beyond help. We need to reunite it with its mother quickly, though. It won't survive long without her milk. Bobcat kittens aren't fully weaned until they're about 2 months old." What followed was a masterclass in wildlife management. The officers located Sage's tracks leading into the forest and found evidence of a new den about 300 yards from Thomas's property, a hollow beneath a fallen ponderosa pine. They set up a reunion box, a specialized crate designed to allow the mother to retrieve her young while preventing her from being trapped. The box was placed strategically between Thomas's house and the new den, with the crying kitten inside. A trail camera was positioned to monitor the situation, and then everyone retreated. Thomas was invited to watch from the officer's vehicle, parked 100 yards away with windows cracked to avoid fogging. "Reunion success rates vary," Officer Rodriguez explained quietly as they waited. "Mothers will sometimes reject returned young, especially if they've been handled by humans or been separated too long. But bobcats are generally good mothers, if she hears the kitten crying." They waited for 3 hours. Thomas's hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. The sun climbed higher, the morning warming into another beautiful Arizona day. Birds sang, unaware of the drama unfolding. Then, on the monitor connected to the trail camera, movement. Sage emerged from the forest shadows, moving with the cautious grace of her species. She approached the box slowly, ears swiveling, nose testing the air. The kitten must have caught her scent because its cries suddenly intensified. "Come on, Mama," David whispered. "That's your baby." Sage circled the box twice, suspicious but drawn by the cries. Then, in a movement so quick the camera barely caught it, she reached into the box and grabbed the kitten. But instead of running immediately back to the forest, she did something remarkable. She turned toward Thomas's house, kitten dangling from her mouth, and stood there for a long moment. "She's looking for you," Officer Rodriguez said softly. "I think she's saying goodbye." Thomas pressed his hand against the vehicle window, tears streaming down his face for the second time in 2 weeks. "Goodbye, Sage," he whispered. "Take care of them." The bobcat turned and melted back into the forest, her kitten safe in her jaws. The officers stayed another hour, retrieving their equipment and ensuring all the kittens were accounted for at the new den via thermal imaging. They provided Thomas with information about living in bobcat territory, tips for securing his property without harming wildlife, and a number to call if he had any concerns. "What you did was dangerous and technically illegal," Officer Rodriguez said as they prepared to leave. "But I understand why you did it. Sometimes the heart overrules the head. Just Next time, call us sooner, okay? After they left, Thomas stood on his back porch, looking toward the forest. The house felt impossibly empty now, even more so than before Sage's arrival. The kitchen, which he'd thoroughly cleaned and disinfected, seemed to echo with phantom mules. Margaret's blanket, which he'd washed but couldn't bring himself to put away, lay folded on the counter. But something had changed in those 2 weeks. The silence that had oppressed him for so long didn't feel quite as heavy. He'd been needed again, had played a vital role in something larger than his own loneliness. The wild had trusted him with its most precious secret, and he'd proven worthy of that trust. Over the following weeks, Thomas found himself spending more time on the back porch, binoculars in hand. Occasionally, he'd spot movement in the forest, a flash of tawny fur, the distinctive tufted ears of a bobcat. Once, just at dusk, he saw all of them. Sage was teaching her kittens to hunt, demonstrating the patient stalking technique that would one day make them apex predators of their ecosystem. The runt was there too, keeping up with its siblings, its early struggle apparently overcome. Thomas's children noticed the change in him immediately. His voice on their calls was stronger, more animated. He started volunteering with the local wildlife rehabilitation center, sharing his story and helping care for orphaned and injured animals. He even gave a presentation at the elementary school, complete with trail camera footage of Sage and her kittens, inspiring a new generation to respect and protect wildlife. One evening, 6 months after Sage's departure, Thomas was reading on the porch when movement caught his eye. A bobcat sat at the forest edge, watching him. It was smaller than Sage, with a distinctive white patch on its chest. The runt. They regarded each other for a long moment, two souls who'd shared an extraordinary experience. Then the young bobcat turned and vanished into the shadows. Thomas smiled, raising his coffee mug in a silent toast. "You made it, little one," he said to the empty forest. "You made it." Inside, the phone rang. It was Emily, calling for their weekly chat. Thomas went to answer it, leaving the back door open to the evening breeze. The wild was always welcome here, he'd decided. After all, sometimes the most unexpected visitors bring the most precious gifts. Not just new life, but renewed purpose, connection, and the reminder that we're never truly alone in this world. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like home. A home that had sheltered not just human memories, but had become part of a wilder story. One written in paw prints and punctuated by the fierce love of a mother for her young. Thomas had been privileged to witness it, to play a small part in it, and to carry it forward in every story he told, every animal he helped, every moment he chose connection over isolation. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the light was just right, he'd find a paw print in the dust by the back door, a reminder that the wild remembers those who show it kindness, and that the boundaries between our world and theirs are far more permeable than we imagine. The bobcats had given him something precious, proof that life persists, that nature adapts, and that even in our loneliest moments, we're part of something infinitely larger and more beautiful than ourselves.